Hey y'all, welcome back to the lab. In this video, we're going to be talking about how I generated 100,000 web pages for my side project using AI. So I'm currently building Full Stack Projects, an idea generator for side projects that you might want to build. The initial version consisted of mashing brands and nouns together, but I wanted to see if we could take this a bit further by using AI. And in this post, I'll share how I utilized OpenAI's API to generate 100,000 web pages for these ideas. And of course, I'm, just a random guy on the internet, so you shouldn't trust what I say. And so what I've done is I built a little stats page for my project here, make it bigger so you can see it, which has like up-to-date counts on all the generations. And so you can see we have about 308,000 total ideas. These are kind of like random procedurally generated ideas from a bunch of big lists. And then we have total descriptions, which are these AI generated descriptions, which I use for web pages. And so we have about 108,000 of those unique pages. And then I also have a separate process, which is, outside the scope of this video, but is using these descriptions to help rank these ideas by quality, and I'm calling these things votes, and we have about 7,600 of those. So a little bit of proof that yes, we're actually doing this in production. Okay, now let's talk about generating a project web page with AI. So a web page is really just a display of information, and so in order to have a web page, we need info to display on it. And full stack projects ideas are really just phrases and often like pretty bad or meaningless nonsense because, we're doing procedural generation. It's literally just dumb randomness. And so we use AI to give a better context for what an idea based on this might look like. Then we display that on a page. And so let me show you what full stack projects looks like. And so let me make it smaller. And basically it's just a bunch of ideas, right? So like I'm in the random section and I'm just getting a bunch of ideas. And like some of these are bad. It's like global entry for context. What is that? Robinhood for Gates. Like, I don't know. You could figure that out, I guess. But it's really just random stuff. And so what I've done is basically allowed, we have my voter guy in the background, but provided some context here. And so if we go to one of these data things, we can actually see the AI generated web page, which, is not very pretty, but we can see we have like a description. It's giving some ratings. It's giving some descriptions of why it's giving these ratings. This page could probably be cleaned up, but this is basically what we're building to provide some more context of like, what does this even mean? And why are you rating it like this? And so the prompt that I'm using that asks AI to basically do these things. It says like, hey, give a description of the project idea, provide some ratings and explanations for why you believe that, and then return this in a JSON format so my code understands. And this basically makes AI do the thinking part of this and then gives us back those thoughts in a way that my code can utilize. My code is pretty dumb. It can't do this kind of like free form stuff. And so it needs it in a form, usually like, JSON or something like that, that it can actually read and store somewhere. And so here's like the basic prompt that I'm using. And basically what I do is I like give it this prompt and then I send it the idea name like this, and it's going to generate that context. And so basically it gives it like, what the role you're playing, what is about to happen, what you need to provide, an example of like what it needs to provide here in JSON format. So the whole prompt's here if you want to take a look at it in the blog post. Now, I'm not an AI expert, so there are probably like better ways to do this, but this is what I've got so far, and it seems to follow general best practices for LLM prompting, though, I'm sure there's like way better ways to go about this. And basically the general best practices that I've seen are like, you got to set perspective, like what role is the AI going to take? What criteria am I looking for? What are the specific instructions that you need to use? And then give an example response so that it knows how to return. And generally it follows these things. I would say probably like, I don't know, one out of a few hundred, it like doesn't quite give me what I'm looking for. And so my generator will fail, but generally it follows this pretty well. Now, a full overview of how I integrated my system with AI APIs is outside the scope of this project, but I do have an overview of the approach, including the code in this post here, how to call OpenAI's API with F# on GPT-4o. And basically you could just use that and put this in there instead of the prompt that's in that post, and that's how I'm doing this. All right, so now on to generating 100,000 web pages with AI. So now that we have an understanding of like how we might generate a single web page, let's look at how we can scale this up to 100,000 web pages. And a naive approach of this would be to simply loop over all the ideas in your database and generate descriptions for them. And this is basically what we'll do, but with a slight modification so we aren't constantly hitting OpenAI's rate limits. They have like rate limit tiers basically, so if you're new and you're not paying them much like me, then you get like a pretty low rate limit, but they can get pretty high if you're paying them a lot of money. Now the approach I basically took to do this was a throttled loop, which generates about 100 web pages a minute, and I built this using F# mailbox processor, which is basically an actor. If you're not familiar with actors, you can think of it just like a cron task, a task that runs every, some amount of minutes. And basically on each run, what it does is looks up 100 ideas on my database, generates for the ones without web pages, and then tells itself to run in a minute, effectively, creating that endless throttled loop. And it's pretty simple, and it seems to work pretty well. So here's the code for that. We're not going to go too much into detail for this because it's kind of out of the scope of this, but I really like mailboxes, and so I thought I would just share an overview of this. Basically, we just have a message type, think of this as queues or event sourcing, that kind of a message of here's something that happened, I need you to do something about it. I have a class that wraps this that basically takes in the context, which is stuff like how do you access my database, and then it gives it a few parameters what's the initial seconds you should run, and how much should you generate every time you run, and then we create the mailbox. And basically it's like an actor is really just a consumer of a queue, and there's only one of them. And so we basically start that here with this mailbox, and we say hey, every time you're going to loop, go get the next message from the queue. If the message is takes seconds, which we know it is because there's only one of these, then I need you to sleep for the amount that the message tells you to wait for. And then I need you to co-generate your content, and then you figure out the next wait time and post another message to yourself, effectively making this an endless loop queue. Last part of this that's necessary is because we've only created the mailbox, we haven't actually started it, and so we do need to post our first message into this queue so that it actually starts the endless loop. So yeah, the code's here for that. Going into depth in mailbox processors is outside the scope of this, but I've enjoyed them a lot, and I think it's one of the really cool things that's kind of built into F# for little processes like this. All right, last thing I want to touch on is how much did this cost me? How much did it cost to actually generate 100,000 articles like this? And time-wise, it took me a few days to put together. This is for a few reasons. One, I build all this stuff in my free time. I had to do a few tweaks because things were breaking, and the cadence was wrong. I was trying to generate too many things. OpenAI got mad at me. And then I also had a few issues with the API just because I've never really used it before. So for instance, I ran out of credits and I didn't know about it. And so for a few days, it just wasn't generating. And so that's generally time-wise, but I think overall it was pretty easy to use AI, and I'll probably use it more in the future now that I know how easy this is to hook up. And then money-wise, I've spent about $26 in credits on this. I will say that I am using cheaper model, which is GPT-4o Mini. All the minis are not as smart, but they're much cheaper. So I think this is keeping the cost low, but on the flip side, I think that I'm probably doing this wrong. There's probably a way to cache the system prompt so that I'm not spending money on tokens back and forth, which is the expensive part. And so I'm sure there's a way to do this. I just haven't found it, and it hasn't been necessary for me. So I'm probably both paying less than most people would, but also more because I'm using this improperly. Next. So overall, I had a good time exploring AI for its generative capabilities. I don't think the content itself is very high quality, but I think that a lot of this is just because the original ideas that I generated with just pure random words weren't very good either. And I have a feeling there's probably a better way to leverage AI so that it's kind of filtering out to the best ones at each stage in the process, kind of like a multi-step thinking thing, but I haven't used it that much, so I'm not sure. Big picture, I still think that an internet future with mostly AI generated content is a bit grim, but I do think there are potential positive outcomes from these capabilities. I think we all are frustrated with Google's front pages for being kind of trash, just all the results are just awful. And I think we're probably going to keep having that with more AI, unfortunately. But I do think there's cool capabilities for using this thought process for good things. For an example for me is how might we use AI to help rank and filter out these ideas, or help rank and filter out messages for being mean or bad things. There's a lot of ways that a little bit of thought sprinkled in could improve, I think, the internet and software systems in general. But yeah, if you're looking for some random project ideas, check out FullstackProjects. I'm kind of hacking on this on and off here and there as I have an idea for something. So take a look at that. And if you like this post, you might also like how to call OpenAI's API with F# using GPT-4o. Might also be interested in generating full stack project ideas with F#, more on how I built full stack projects and kind of like the thought process behind it. And then finally, you might be interested in how I built a stock options scanner in F# for another kind of side project I hacked on. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.